Joining me right now is one of those 5 House Democrats that has publicly called on Biden to exit the race, Massachusetts Congressman Seth Moulton. It's good to see you, my friend. We're glad you're here.
Good to see you.
Let's see. You came in at number 3 or 4 on Friday of the 5 that have made this distinction, calling for the president to step aside. You couldn't have done it easily, right? In the statement, here's what you said. Now is the time for President Biden to step aside, to let new leaders rise up and run against former President Trump. When your current strategy isn't working, it is rarely the right decision to double down. President Biden is not going to get younger. Walk us through how you got to this position.
Well, first of all, Alex, this was a difficult decision because I think President Biden has been an amazing president who's done so much for our country as president, and of course, for decades serving in the Senate before. He's also been a close personal mentor to me. I used to go to his house for breakfast when he was vice president, and he coached me on being a new member of Congress. He campaigned for me up in my district in Massachusetts. So first of all, I just had a lot of conversations behind the scenes, trying to talk to people in the White House, in the inner circle, trying to convey the concerns that myself and many of my colleagues and many of my constituents share, that he may not be the best choice to take on Donald Trump and ensure we win in November. But when those behind the scenes conversations didn't work, I decided it was time to go public with the concerns that so many of us Democrats share.
Yeah. And by the way, if I misspoke and say it couldn't have been of course it was a difficult decision. Thank you for that. Let me ask you, because you say that the Democratic Party should now look into all viable options to replace Biden at the top of the ticket. So who would you support, if not Vice President Harris, or would it be Vice President Harris?
Actually, I think this is a very open debate right now that's happening in our party, which is a good and healthy thing for a party to have, is these discussions about what our future looks like. And frankly, that's a debate that Americans want to hear as well. So whether it's some sort of contested mini primary or whether the president decides to hand the reins to Vice President Harris, who I think many Americans have underestimated, I'm not sure exactly what the right answer is. I'm not an expert on all the intricacies of how delegates work and everything. That's the sort of party insider stuff, which has never been my focus. But whatever the process is, one thing I want to make clear, I think it will be good for Democrats. I think it will attract a lot of attention to this race. It will showcase this new generation of Democratic leaders who bring so much diversity and talent to our party and are doing great things right now in service all across the country. All of that is good for Democrats. That's good for our party, not just for the presidential race, but for races up and down the ticket. This is exactly what a party should do when facing a challenge like this. It's exactly what Americans expect. If your strategy is not working, change the strategy. Be decisive. Show America that Democrats can lead.
How come this wasn't being discussed in this manner? Granted, you didn't have a debate, but a year ago, President Biden was 80. We already knew, we talked about his age and the concerns that a lot of people might have just for that reason alone. So when you're talking about this and what there could be some sort of mini contest and the like, here's the problem. You've got a calendar you have to look at right now, right? So if Biden steps aside, if Harris, let's say, isn't the nominee, I mean, you're welcoming discussion. There are less than 3 months after the convention to get voters excited to support the Democrat atop the ticket. Could a divisive nomination process, say at the convention, could that hurt Democrats in November, making them look like they don't have all their ducks in a row and they aren't together?
No, I don't think so. I think the party is incredibly united right now behind one thing, and that's defeating Donald Trump. And that's why we're willing to have these tough discussions. Look, you asked why this didn't happen before. It's easy to be a Monday morning quarterback. I think there were some concerns before and earlier. But of course, the debate, which really was sadly disastrous for the president, put those conversations into focus. And the important point is that we're having those discussions now. We're doing exactly what a healthy party should do, right? Contrast this with the Republican Party, who's just lined up behind a convicted criminal. They don't even dare question Donald Trump. They know that his poll numbers aren't great and that he's almost as old as President Biden, but they're just following him blindly. Democrats are showing that we are a much more vibrant party. We're willing to question ourselves. We're willing to change strategy if that's what it takes to win. And at the end of the day, because we understand the stakes are so high with defeating Donald Trump and literally saving our democracy, we're going to be united behind our nominee, whoever he or she is.
Well, look, you and I could have a conversation for an hour about the whys behind Donald Trump and the Republicans who still support him and still not come to a very logical conclusion for that. But let's talk about what's happening now, which is leader Hakeem Jeffries. He's going to soon hold a virtual meeting with top Democrats. It's set in about 45 minutes or so to weigh the options before Congress returns to Washington tomorrow. When lawmakers return to Capitol Hill, do you expect more to call for Biden to step aside? And look, at what point does the president, who he has said quite firmly he's not quitting the race, at what point does he have to end his bid for a second term?
Well, ultimately, that's a decision that the president has to make. But I think the decision that a lot of colleagues of mine on Capitol Hill will be making over the next few days is just what is the best way to deal with this problem when so many share my concerns but just haven't decided to voice them publicly yet. There may be some who say after the ABC interview when the president was quite defiant and dismissive of many of the concerns that, look, he's just not going to change his mind, and so it doesn't matter and we shouldn't speak up. Of course, there will be others who say, you know, you got to speak now and try to make a change while there is still time to have a process to get united behind a new nominee. So that'll be a subject of intense debate, I'm sure, in the next few days when we return to Washington.
And look, at the very top of this, you said that the voters need to decide what to do. Put this to the American people. You've got post-debate polls right now that show Trump widening his lead over Biden. What have your constituents told you the last 10 days since the debate or last couple days since the interview? Has anything reassured them that he is up to the job of running a vigorous campaign and a second term?
Alex, I haven't been approached by more constituents just on the street in a couple years about an issue like I have been over the past 10 days.
People so they're worried.
Are very concerned. They're very concerned, and they see these numbers. And I don't think it helps that the president has just been dismissive of the polls and said he doesn't believe the polls. I mean, maybe the polls are a little bit off, but we're running against a convicted criminal who incited a mob to storm the Capitol. I mean, this should be easy. Our nominee should be crushing Donald Trump in the polls, and clearly that's not what's happening. In fact, it's going in the opposite direction. I mean, I remember when I got my first poll back in my first run for Congress, I was only 53 points down, Alex. That wasn't where I wanted to be, and I could have debated it. My pollster told me it was statistically impossible to win, but what I said is, actually, let's believe this. Let's listen to what the poll says. Let's listen to what voters are saying and change our strategy. That's what I did. I changed the strategy completely. I believed the data and said we need to take a different approach. And that's ultimately how I won that first race. I think that's what the Democratic Party and President Biden in particular needs to do right now. Let's face the facts, be willing to make a change, and ensure that we can defeat Donald Trump in November.
I'm only sorry I wasn't a Massachusetts resident at the time. I would have voted for you, my friend. That's for darn sure. Anyway, we're glad you won that race and that you're here to talk about all this. I know this has been difficult for you. It is a bold statement that you made on Friday. 1 of 5 on the record. There may be more. Seth Moulton, thank you so much. Appreciate you.
Thanks, Tom.
Hey there, MSNBC fans. I'm Luke Russert, and be sure to join me, Rachel Maddow, Jen Psaki, Lawrence O'Donnell, Steve Kornacki, Joy Reid, and many more September 7th in Brooklyn, MSNBC Live Democracy 2024. Click on the link for ticket information. We will see you there.